Mr. President.
The senator from Kentucky, from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with me today is my colleague from my office, Mr. John Lowry, and I appreciate his help. Last week, Mr. President, I spoke a few minutes about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We call it CPB, and the Public Broadcasting Service, most people know of that as PBS, and the National Public Radio, which most people know as NPR. And I'm not going to repeat everything I said last week, but I do want to revise and extend my remarks. The United States Congress created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting back in the 60s, 1967, I think. Those were very different times. There was no internet. There was no Facebook. There was no Twitter. There was no cable TV. There were no podcasts. There were basically a handful, maybe a few more, of radio stations throughout America. And television was still pretty new. There were 3 main television stations with local affiliates. And many Americans, particularly in rural areas, didn't have access to radio and television for their news, because that's all there was. I remember those days. And so Congress decided to start providing money for what it called at that time public broadcasting, to make sure that everybody had access to news through radio and television, even if they didn't live in their big city. And Congress intended that that news be news, factually based. Now, those were the days in America of true journalism. I remember them. Perhaps you do too, Mr. President. Those were not the days that we experience today, opinion journalism, where young journalists are taught to report on who, what, when, where, how, and their opinion. Those were days when the news was really the news, and it was fair and balanced. So the United States Congress created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPS. CPS here 50 years later, 50 plus years later, or CPB rather, still exists. And here's its relationship, CPB's relationship to NPR and PBS. We give CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, about $500 million a year. A lot of money. And Corporation for Public Broadcasting turns around and picks certain local television and radio stations and gives most of that money to them. And then those local television and radio stations, the chosen few that get money from the American taxpayer through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, buy programming and content from 2 other organizations. If they're a radio station, they buy it from NPR. And if they're a television station, they buy that content from PBS. So up here you've got Corporation for Public Broadcasting. American taxpayer through Congress gives them $500 million a year. That money flows down to certain select local television and radio stations. And those local television and radio stations then buy content from NPR, if they're a radio station, or PBS, if they're a TV station, which were loosely affiliated with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Since this scheme was established, the American taxpayer has given all of these entities about, $14.5 billion. $14.5 billion. That would be enough to build 2,700 miles of paved roads throughout America. And I base that on the roads I'm talking about are not gravel roads, they're regular paved roads, 10 feet each lane, actually 12 feet each lane with a 3-foot shoulder on each side. But instead of building 2,700 miles of roads in our rural areas and in our urban areas that need infrastructure, we've decided to give this money to CPB, which gives it to the local stations, which gives it to PBS and NPR. I mentioned the local stations. Only a select few local stations get this taxpayer money. In my state, we have over 500 radio stations. Corporation for Public Broadcasting, in its unfettered discretion, only picks 7 to give the money to. The other 493 get nothing. We have over 150 TV stations in Louisiana. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting only gives the taxpayer money to 3 of them. So 147 get nothing. Now, I probably wouldn't object to this if the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR and National Public Radio is what I'm referring to, of course, and PBS had been consistent with its original mission, which is to report factually the news to the American people. Government doesn't need to subsidize the media anymore because the world's changed. 97% of the people in America have the internet. But I still probably wouldn't object that much if the reporting by these entities was fair and was balanced, but it is not. No fair-minded person in America can look at this programming and believe that it's unbiased. It is decidedly prejudiced in favor of one point of view. That's not just my opinion. I think most Americans would agree with that. And because most Americans see the headlines that are produced by these 3 entities. I talked about some last week. This is what Americans' taxpayer money is going to do, to provide. Here's just some headlines from NPR. I mentioned these last week. I won't belabor them. Michael Avenatti, a profile of the media-savvy attorney. NPR, this is from NPR. They love Michael Avenatti, who, of course, is in jail today. He's a crook. But NPR loved him because he was anti-Republican and he was anti-President Trump. NPR published another article, How Racism Became a Marketing Tool for Country Music. Now, you don't have to be Euclid to see the implication here, that country music is racist, according to NPR. I don't think any fair-minded person would call that factual or fair and balanced. Here's another headline from NPR. Donald Trump's long embrace of Vladimir Putin. I also talked last week about a few other headlines from NPR. Here's one. Monuments and teams have changed names as America reckons with racism. Birds are next. That's what your tax dollars paid for. Eating less beef is a climate solution. Here's why that's hard for some American men. How the Taliban adds to Afghanistan's woes when it comes to climate-fueled disasters. No fair-minded person with an IQ above a single-cell organism would conclude that this is anything but biased to certain points of view. And there's more. I could do this all night, but I'm not. Here's some more headlines from NPR. There is no neutral. Nice white people can still be complicit in a racist society. That's what your tax dollars paid for. Another one. Ibram X. Kendi says no one is not racist. So what should we do? Another one. How artificial intelligence could perpetuate racism, sexism, and other biases in society. Another. Scientists debunk lab accident theory of pandemic emergence. Here's another one. As Trump pushes theory of virus origins, some see parallels to lead up to Iraq war. Your tax dollars at work. As U.S. confronts Russia, Trump's admiration of Putin is consistent. Another headline from NPR. The history of policing and race in the United States are deeply intertwined. Another. After Biden's debate performance, the presidential race is unchanged. This was the debate performance that President Biden gave, after which he got out of the race. If you believe that headline, you believe in the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and that Jimmy Hoffa died of natural causes. But that's what NPR reported with your tax dollars. Here's more. Democracy on Trial, Part 1. A blueprint for the case against Trump. Is that fair and balanced? It's from PBS. Racism in the era of Trump, an oral history, another headline. January 13th, 2020. Another. This one's really special. A serial liar. How Sarah Palin ushered in the post-truth political era in which Trump has thrived. Now, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR and PBS have the right, whether I like it or not, or whether you like it or not, or whether Americans like it or not, to publish these articles and to broadcast this news. That's the First Amendment. But they don't have the right to do it with taxpayer money. At least half of America would look at these headlines and be offended. They would be offended first because they would really for three reasons. Number one, they disagree with opinion journalism. Number two, they would disagree with the headline. And number three, they would disagree with the fact that these headlines are not fair. They're not objective. They're obviously slanted to one point of view. And they're using taxpayer money. If someone introduced a bill tomorrow, I'll just pick a publication to prohibit the New York Times, I would vote against that bill and argue against it. If someone introduced a bill to get rid of Fox News, I'd have the same position. If someone introduced a bill to get rid of the Washington Post, that would be my position as well. Whether I agree with those media outlets or not, we have a First Amendment, and we cherish it. And I'm rather fond of the Constitution. But if someone introduced a bill to give money to CNN, taxpayer money to CNN, or to the New York Times, or Fox News, I would oppose that as well. This is simply wrong. And we're spending $500 million a year, $14.5 billion over time, to give to people at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR and NPS to participate in opinion journalism, which they're entitled to do. But they can't do it on the taxpayer dime. They're doing it on the taxpayer dime, but they shouldn't be able to. I would also point out, Mr. President, that the folks at PBS and NPR and PBS are doing pretty well for themselves. NPR just bought a $201 million office space just up the road from the Capitol. $200 million. It came from the American taxpayer, so they could publish this stuff. NPR pays its hosts as much as $532,000 a year, taxpayer money. It pays its chief diversity officer about $320,000 a year. And you know what? Despite all of this money that the American taxpayer are giving to these left-of-center entities, their viewership has declined because people don't need them anymore. So why are we giving them money? I've introduced legislation to not to eliminate the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, not to eliminate the Public Broadcasting Service, and not to eliminate the National Public Radio. They can go exist on their own if they want to, but I do want to defund them. We're running a $36 trillion in debt. This is disgraceful in 2025. It's disgraceful whether it is left-of-center opinion journalism or right-of-center opinion journalism. It is disgraceful for the American people to have to fund this rot. Doesn't mean the rot doesn't have a right to exist, but they don't have a right to taxpayer money. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's late, so I'm going to not go to my second topic. I suggest the absence. Well, I take that back, Mr. President. I think I've got something to read.
Do you want to close here at the leader's desk?
No, I'll do it here.
That's 22.
You want me to read the whole thing?
You have to read all these pages. Sorry.
Where's Stone? I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Democratic leader, but no later than Friday, February 28th, the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of SJ Res 10 and the Senate proceed to its consideration. Further, that there be 6 hours for debate only with the time equally divided between the leaders or their designees on the joint resolution. And that following the use or yielding back of that time, the joint resolution be read a third time and the Senate vote on the joint resolution with no further intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I have one request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It has the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, or tomorrow, it stand adjourned until 10 o'clock a.m. on Wednesday, February 19th. That following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business then be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of Cal number 13, S-Con Res 7. Further, that at 12 o'clock noon, the Senate execute the order of February 13th in relation to the Loeffler nomination, and that following disposition of the Loeffler nomination, the Senate recess until 2:15 to allow for the weekly conference lunches. Finally, that all time during recess and adjournment count equally towards Cal number 13, S-Con Res 7, and that if any nominations are confirmed during Wednesday's session, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, is it Wednesday yet? Feels like it.
Of course.
I got over here to vote at 5 o'clock. Mr. President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senator Merkley,
Without objection.
to whom I apologize for him having to wait so long because of our inefficiencies.